Escape from Alcatraz, Part 1. Island Without Hope. Frank Morris stood by the window of his cell in cell block B, looking out over the gray waters of San Francisco Bay. It was December 6, 1961, a cold morning when fog almost completely obscured the mainland shore. He had already been in Alcatraz, the highest security federal prison in the United States, for 2 years, and every day was similar. Rising at 6:30, breakfast in the dining hall, work in the workshop, a walk in the prison yard, dinner, and a return to his cell. The monotony was almost palpable, like the thick walls surrounding him. Frank was an unusual person for a prisoner. His IQ was 133, above average, and he possessed a rare quality, patience. While other prisoners played cards or exercised, Frank read books from the prison library, studied technical literature, and most importantly, observed. He observed the daily routine, the guards, and the weak points in the security system. He wasn't there for a violent crime. He'd been convicted of robbing a bank in 1956, and while he was smart, he was also quite desperate. Alcatraz was known worldwide as an impenetrable fortress. The 22-acre island sat 1.5 kilometers offshore in the frigid waters of the Gulf. Currents were strong, and the water temperature rarely rose above 12 degrees Celsius. Officially, no one could escape alive. During the prison's 29 years of existence, there were several escape attempts, but all ended either in the escapees' deaths or their capture. Security was at its highest. Every prisoner was under constant surveillance. Cells were checked regularly. The walls were made of steel and concrete, and the windows had bars. The prison guards were armed and trained. A watchtower with a guard stood on the roof. Boats patrolled the island constantly, but Frank Morris saw what others didn't. He saw opportunity. Part 2. Allies. In January 1962, Frank met the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence. They worked in the same workshop as him. John was older, 32. Clarence was younger, 26. The brothers were experienced criminals, but in Alcatraz, they seemed as doomed as everyone else. However, Frank noticed a quality in them that he admired. They were willing to take risks. Frank began by offering them a plan, not a specific one, more of an idea. He spoke carefully, only when they were sure no one could hear. While working in the workshop, when the noise of the machines drowned out their voices, he told them of his observations. "See that ventilation shaft?" he asked one day, pointing to a metal pipe in the ceiling. "It leads to the roof. The guards rarely check it, if we can expand it." The brothers listened. They were interested. Soon a fourth man joined them, Alan West, a 35-year-old inmate who worked in the tool shop. West was rough and impulsive, but he was useful. He had metalworking skills and knew where to get tools. The four men began planning. They met rarely and cautiously, discussing details only in the most secure locations. The plan was complex and took time. They knew they had only one chance. Failure meant additional years in prison and possibly death. Part 3. Preparation. The first stage of the plan was the longest. They needed to enlarge the hole in the wall of their cells so they could crawl through it. The hole was behind the toilet, in the wall separating their cells from the service corridor. The guards rarely checked this area because it was hidden from view. Frank began by obtaining tools. In the workshop, he found an old saw and a few other items that could be repurposed into the necessary tools. He worked slowly and carefully, every evening when the lights in the hallways were dimmed. He used a damp cloth to muffle the sound of the saw and regularly checked to make sure no one could hear him. West helped him by obtaining the necessary materials. The Angelina brothers worked on their part of the plan. The months passed. The winter of 1962 gave way to spring, and spring to summer. Frank continued sawing. His fingers bled, but he didn't stop. Every day he made a little progress, and every day he risked being caught. The guards occasionally passed by his cell, but they noticed nothing suspicious. Frank was a quiet, obedient prisoner. He didn't cause any trouble. No one expected anything dangerous from him. By June 1962, the hole was large enough. Frank could crawl through it into the utility corridor, but that was only the first part of the plan. The second part was even more ambitious. They needed to reach the roof. Frank discovered that the ventilation shaft he'd seen in the workshop ran through several levels of the building. If they could widen it enough, they could crawl through it and reach the roof. He began working on the ventilation shaft. That was even more challenging. It was more dangerous than working in the cell because the shaft was in a public place. But Frank was patient. He worked in short bursts when he could, and was always ready to stop if anyone approached. By August, the ventilation shaft had been widened enough. They could crawl through it. The third part of the plan was the most difficult. They needed to build a raft to cross the bay. They couldn't simply jump in and swim. The current was too strong, the water was too cold, and they didn't know if they could survive. They needed a raft, and they needed life jackets. Frank began gathering materials. He used the raincoats he and his comrades could get from the mess hall. He collected pieces of rubber, plastic, anything he could find. He worked on it in his cell, carefully gluing the pieces together, creating the structure of the raft. Angelina's brothers helped him. They collected materials from various locations throughout the prison and passed them on to Frank. West worked on other details of the plan. Months passed. Frank worked with an obsession bordering on madness. He slept little, thinking about the plan constantly. Every day he was on the brink of discovery. Every day he risked everything. By December 1962, the raft was almost complete. Frank had created a crude but functional raft from raincoats and other materials. It wasn't particularly beautiful, but it would keep 4 men afloat. Part 4. Final preparations. New Year's 1963 began with tension. Frank knew they were approaching a critical point. The guards were becoming more attentive, or so he imagined. He saw them staring at him longer than usual. Perhaps they suspected something, but the plan was already too far advanced to stop. Frank and his comrades were ready. They chose a date, June 11th, 1963. It was a Tuesday, an ordinary day, nothing out of the ordinary to attract the guards' attention. Frank had spent the last few days preparing. He made sure the raft was ready, the tools were in place, everyone knew their roles. The night before the escape, Frank didn't sleep. He lay in his cell and listened to the sounds of the prison, the guards' footsteps, the jingle of keys, distant voices. He thought about what awaited him. He thought about the cold water of the bay, the strong current, the guard boats. He thought about everything that could go wrong, but he also thought about freedom, about never seeing these walls again, about living the life he chose, not the life that was chosen for him. On the morning of June 11th, Frank rose at his usual time. He went through his usual routine: breakfast, work, a walk. No one noticed anything unusual in his behavior. He was calm, as always. Part 5. Escape. At 9:30 p.m., Frank returned to his cell. The guard closed the door and he heard the key in the lock. He was alone, as he was every evening. He waited. Minutes felt like hours. He listened to the guards walking down the hallway, checking the cells. He waited for them to pass his cell and head to another part of the building. At 10 p.m., he heard a signal, a light knock on the wall. It was John Angelin from the next cell. The time had come. Frank stood up and walked to the toilet. He removed the lid and pushed it aside. The hole he had been sawing for months was before him. He squeezed through. his narrow body easily passing through the opening. He found himself in the service corridor. John Angelin was already there, waiting for him. Clarence and West followed. The four men moved in the darkness cautiously, barely breathing. They knew the layout of the prison like the back of their hand. They'd been studying it for months. They knew where the guards were, where the blind spots in the CCTV were. They reached the ventilation shaft. Frank climbed up first, squeezing through the widened opening. His hands slid over the metal. His feet searched for purchase. The others followed behind him. The ventilation shaft was narrow and stuffy. Frank could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Every sound seemed loud. Every movement seemed dangerous. But he kept moving forward. Finally, he emerged from the shaft. He was on the roof. The night was dark, fog obscuring most of the island. Frank could see the lights of San Francisco in the distance, shimmering in the darkness. They seemed so close, yet so far away. The other three emerged onto the roof. They said nothing, just looked at each other. They had done it. They climbed out of their cells, out of the building. They were on the roof of Alcatraz, and ahead of them was only water. They climbed down from the roof using a simple rope they fashioned from materials found in the prison. They found themselves in the courtyard, where the security guards were stationed. This was the most dangerous place. If a guard looked out the window, he would see them. But the guards were elsewhere. Maybe they were lucky, or maybe their plan was better than they thought. They reached the edge of the island. Before them was water, black, cold, endless. The waves crashed against the rocks with a noise that seemed loud in the stillness of the night. Frank and the Anguilin brothers donned the life jackets they'd fashioned from raincoats. They were primitive, but they would work. West stopped. He looked at the water, his face white. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't do this." Frank grabbed his hand. "You can. We all can. Just follow us." But West shook his head. Fear was stronger than his desire for freedom. He retreated. "Good luck," he said. "I'll be back. I'll tell them I didn't know anything." Frank had no time to argue. He turned to the Anguilin brothers. "Let's go." They launched the raft into the water. It floated, bobbing on the waves. Frank jumped in first. The cold was staggering, almost paralyzing. His breath caught, his muscles clenched, but he forced himself to move, forced himself to swim toward the raft. Angelina's brothers jumped in after him. They swam toward the raft, their movements desperate, almost panicked. They climbed onto the raft. It was low in the water, almost completely submerged, but it held them. They began to row, using pieces of wood as oars. The current was stronger than they expected. The raft was quickly carried away from the island, but not in the direction of the mainland. The current pulled them sideways toward the open sea. Frank rowed with all his might. His arms burned, his muscles screamed in pain, but he didn't stop. Behind them, the island disappeared into the fog. Ahead of them, there was only water and night. Part 6. In the water. The hours passed. Frank lost track of time. Was it half an hour or two? He didn't know. His body was numb with cold. His mind focused on only one thing: row, row, row. John Angelin rowed next to him. Clarence was on the other side of the raft. They said nothing, just breathed heavily and continued to row. The raft moved slowly toward the mainland. The lights of San Francisco were getting closer, but very slowly. The current was against them, and they were exhausted. Frank saw the lights of the guard boats patrolling the water. They were far away, but they were there. The guards already knew about the escape. They were searching for them. He forced himself to row faster. His arms were bleeding, his legs were numb, but he continued. Behind them, the island was already invisible in the darkness. Ahead of them lay freedom. If they could just get there. Time dragged on. Minutes became hours. Frank felt his consciousness begin to fade. The cold was killing him. He heard voices, saw things that weren't there. He was afraid he would fall into the water and drown. But he didn't give up. He thought about his years in Alcatraz, about the gray walls, the monotony. He thought about how he would never return there again. He would swim to the end, even if it meant the end. Finally, at about 4 a.m., the raft touched something solid. Rocks. They reached shore. Frank and the Anguillin brothers climbed out of the water, their bodies shaking from cold and exhaustion. They were alive. They had made it. They lay on the rocks, breathing heavily, unable to move. Fog surrounded them, and they didn't know where they were. But they were free. Part 7. After the escape. When the guards discovered that Frank, the Anguillin brothers, and West had disappeared, panic broke out on Alcatraz. It was the first successful prison break in its history. It was an impossibility that had happened. The Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately launched a search. They searched all of California for the 4 men. They checked every road, every town, every possible hiding place. But Frank, John, and Clarence were gone. They simply vanished. Later that day, when the raft was found near the shore, the matter became even more puzzling. The raft was empty. There was no trace of the 4 men. They had either drowned or somehow made it to shore and disappeared. The FBI assumed they had drowned. The current in the bay was too strong, the water too cold. No one could have survived in such conditions. Officially, the escape was declared a failure, and the 3 men were presumed dead. But were they dead? Alan West was arrested a few hours later when he tried to return to his cell. He told the guards everything he knew about the plan. He received additional time for the escape attempt. Frank Morris, John Anguillin, and Clarence Anguillin were never found. No bodies, no trace, nothing. They simply vanished into the night. Part 8. The Legend. After the escape of Frank Morris and the Anguillin brothers, Alcatraz became even more famous. The story of the escape spread throughout the world. People were fascinated by the idea that someone could escape the impenetrable fortress. Were they alive? That was the question everyone asked. Officially, they were presumed dead, drowned in the frigid waters of the bay. But no bodies were ever found. Some people believed they survived. They believed Frank and the Anguillin brothers reached shore, dried their clothes, and disappeared into the night. They believed the 3 men were living somewhere, hiding from the law, enjoying the freedom they so desperately sought. Others believed they drowned, that the current was too strong, that the cold was so intense that no one could survive in such conditions. They believed the 3 men had found freedom in death. The truth lay somewhere between these 2 versions, but it has never been fully revealed. Several years after the escape, the FBI received several letters purportedly from Frank Morris. In one letter, he claimed to be alive, to have survived, and to be in Brazil. But the letters were never verified, and the FBI considered them forgeries. In 1979, 16 years after the escape, a note purportedly written by John Anguillin was found in Brazil. The note claimed to be alive, that he and his brother had survived, and that they were living in South America. But this note, too, was never verified. Part 9. Legacy. The Alcatraz escape remains one of the most famous and mysterious stories in the history of American forensic science. It has inspired books, films, and documentaries. People were fascinated by the idea that 3 men could plan and execute an escape from the most secure prison in the world. In 1962, Alcatraz closed. Officially, the closure was due to high maintenance costs, But many believed the escape of Frank Morris and the Anguillin brothers was the last straw. The prison, once considered impenetrable, was compromised. Its reputation was destroyed. Alcatraz Island became a tourist attraction. People came to see the cells where America's most dangerous criminals lived. They looked at the hole in the wall through which Frank had crawled. They looked at the ventilation shaft he had widened. They stood on the roof and looked at the water through which he had swum. And they asked themselves one question: did they survive? Part 10. Truth and Mystery. Decades after the escape, when Frank Morris was already an old man, if he was alive, the question of his fate remained unanswered. Officially, he was presumed dead, but no evidence of his death was ever found. In 2013, 50 years after the escape, the FBI received a letter from a man claiming to be John Anguillin. The letter stated that John and his brother, Clarence, had survived, that they had lived long lives in South America, and that they were dying of illness in old age. The letter was written asking the FBI to end the search. The FBI investigated the letter but was never able to confirm its authenticity. The letter could have been a forgery, or it could have been genuine. No one knew. Frank Morris remained a legend, a man who planned the impossible and perhaps accomplished it. A man who was smart enough, patient enough, and courageous enough to attempt an escape from Alcatraz. Was he alive? Did he die in the frigid waters of the Gulf? Did he live in South America, enjoying the freedom he so desperately sought? No one knows. And perhaps that's the best ending for this story. A mystery that will never be solved. A legend that will never die. Epilogue. Alcatraz today is a museum. Tourists walk the corridors where America's most dangerous criminals once lived. They see the cells, they see the dining hall, they see the site of one of the most famous escapes in history. But when they stand on the roof and look out over the water, they think of Frank Morris and the Anguillin brothers. They think about what happened that night, June 11th, 1963. They think about whether they survived, and in their imagination, 3 men swim across the frigid waters of the Gulf, swim to freedom, swim to a new life. They swim into a legend that will never die. Frank Morris, John Anguillin, and Clarence Anguillin remain one of the greatest mysteries of American criminal history. Their fate remains unknown, but their story remains eternal. A story about the human desire for freedom, about the human capacity for the impossible, about how sometimes the greatest escapes happen not from prisons, but from circumstances that try to break us. They either died in the attempt or lived in freedom. But either way, they escaped Alcatraz, and that is their victory.